guys, so I've listened to this stream with V and Karen. It's a really nice stream because, well, Karen's in it. But this is one of those times that I wish I was one of the popular YouTubers so I can get invited to go on such a stream because I really want to address one issue from this stream, which come towards the end. This topic is something that comes up a lot. So in the Middle East, especially Saudi Arabia, there's real patriarchy and women are treated like shit. Is that true? Well, yes it is. But how about the men? Well, they are treated better. Why are they treated better? Because we're just told so. Well, let's have a listen.
Yes, you can find them with Muslims in the West that think like this. But the thing is, right? Feminists do get the free pass because they're women. You're right.
Yeah, they do.
And obviously, I think it's the fact that men are probably hardwired to defend women,
Yes.
which is why you don't see it.
Okay, so if men are hardwired to defend women,
Yeah.
how is it so easy to believe that there's an entire culture of 1.3 billion people whose entire culture is based on hating women and hurting them?
You mean the Islamic world?
Huh. Now, I'm not saying women are treated great there. I'm just not saying I can't understand how people will actually say what you just said. Dave Rubin said it to me too, right? So you think that men are hardwired to protect women. You think that men are hardwired to treat women more gently than they treat other men. You think that, men are hardwired in this way. Yes, I do. So how can an entire culture be based on treating women scads and scads more poorly than it treats men?
Because they would do it thinking it's for their benefit. Like you have people who believe women are destroying Western civilization. They're anti-democratic, basically. And I really like what the National Socialists did to women, or how the communists treated women in Romania. Like, for instance, in Romania, you had a doctor coming in schools when women were the age of 30 in order to check to see if they're still virgins. And then they would have a monthly checkup by doctors every single month to see in factories if they got pregnant or whatnot. Constant indoctrination, the idea that a woman can work and have babies as well. And the mentality was that when they come home, the woman still takes care of the children while the man sleeps. I guess that's how you can have, a society that oppresses women, because you justify that it's for their own good. It's for the good of society, and that's the woman's role.
Okay, so at this point, I actually side with V a bit. But to clarify, we're kind of talking about a hypothetical scenario. Can there be an entire culture that just does things that go against human nature or some norm? Yes, there can be. One should not underestimate the power of the ruling class. Ruling classes can literally change the culture. They can change the language you speak in a country. They can change the religion. They can enforce very unnatural things, such as, for example, as V brought up, communism. Christianity was a fringe cult in the Roman Empire for a very long time, and then suddenly it became the dominant religion of the entire Europe because the emperor demanded it. Now, I'm not saying that Christians themselves had absolutely no role to play in it, but I think it's safe to argue that the biggest contributor to this shift in culture from a fringe Jewish cult to essentially the dominant culture of non-Jewish Europe is the ruling emperor. So theoretically, yes, you can have a ruling class that makes laws, forcibly enforce laws that go exclusively against the favor of women. And I think, yes, if you have, angry MGTOW or his likes to be the ruling class, that can literally happen. In our history, could it have happened is another thing. The reason why it may not have happened yet is not just because of the nature of men's gynocentrism, but also the long history of the participation of women in the system. Believe it or not, women for the longest time, in especially traditional societies everywhere, did actively complement men in a partnership. They were willing to let men fulfill those masculine roles as they fulfilled the quote unquote feminine roles. So even in the ruling class, you have women who are satisfied with letting the men calling all the shots while they do their my lady things. So there's the men's intrinsic gynocentrism and there's the women's cooperation in a partnership. So men also don't see the need to oppress women in the way that feminists think that they did. This is especially true in the West, where the ruling class was uniquely monogamous. Again, I've talked about this elsewhere, about this very interesting, unique aspect of the European culture, and only European culture, of monogamy from the very beginning all the way back to ancient Greece. Monogamy resulted in women having an even more important status than women of the ruling class in polygamous societies, such as China. In China, because the emperor can have as many wives as he can, pretty much, he can choose the one who becomes the most important wife, the empress or the noble concubine. It really jacked up the competition of women for his favor, making the women more dangerous. So while there's still gynocentrism going on, the wives of the emperor are not held as the same esteem as the Western queens. At least this is what I'm convinced of, knowing both cultures. By this I mean that there was not as much of an ideology of men needing to serve women as part of his manhood. Many of them still did it, don't get me wrong, but it was not so exaggerated and populated like the West. The emperors in China also could dispose of an empress or the noble consul or whatever in China whenever and however he likes, just based on, let's say, she displeased me. Whereas in the West, even Henry VIII had to do something as drastic as forming his own church and breaking up with the ruling Catholic Church in order to divorce his first queen. So the restrictions of how many things the male ruler can do to his wife is just much more in the West than in the East.
Of course, of course. And I'm not saying that there are no societies that oppress women. But to say that, there are societies where men live like kings and women live like slaves.
Oh, that's not Saudi Arabia. You can marry 3 women. You can marry 4 women.
Yeah, and you have to support them. And if you want to divorce them, you have to pay them.
Yeah, but I did talk with people who live in Saudi Arabia. And most of the time, I mean, the law and the culture, they dictate that you have to support them, but the reality isn't the
same. Okay, and what about all of the men who don't get to get married?
What about them?
Well, and they never get to have sex either.
If I were to choose, to be born in the West, if I could choose between man or a woman, I really wouldn't care. Like, I definitely, inclined to be a man, but I wouldn't care if I was born a woman. I mean, if I was a woman with big tits, my YouTube career would skyrocket. But if I were to choose, if I were a man or a woman in the Middle East, I would definitely 100% choose a man. No question.
I would have a hard time. I would have a hard time deciding. And I guess part of it is because I've investigated things a little bit, right? I mean, like, you remember the Boko Haram kidnappings of the girls, right?
Yeah.
Right?
I talked about it on my
in a couple of years prior to that, they kidnapped over 10,000 boys.
Right. But I'm talking about you would be in a...
Western media didn't fucking make a peep. And that's just the ones that they kidnapped, not the ones that they burned in the
I'm not talking about having, obviously, being a Yaziri woman or being a woman that's married to a wealthy person is a different status. I'm saying, like being an average middle income house in Saudi Arabia, and you can either be the daughter or you can be the brother of a family. And obviously you're not going to be kidnapped or anything like that. I don't think many people would say woman. Remember,
I don't think many people would either, but I don't think, and here's something that I found interesting, because there was somebody who was, he emailed me like years ago, and he said something about, he and his family, um, they are not he and his family, a friend and his family moved to the Middle East, and they had investigated very, very much the position of women and girls in those societies, and they opted to, because they were just going to live there for 6 months, and they opted to leave her at home with relatives, and brought their son, and their son was killed for, I think, wearing a T-shirt with a Western logo.
Well, if you're not woman,
They never thought to investigate what it might be like for boys.
No, I
in that
understand.
It never occurred to them.
Maybe this is your opinion, but I would definitely not want to be a woman in Saudi Arabia.
So this is the part where V just didn't think so deeply about this. I'm not going to go into the specifics of what's really going on in Saudi Arabia. You can see my video regarding the hashtag Saudi women, where it was quite funny how every time Habib, who was hosting it, tried to white knight the women on the stream, and we found out that the situation was actually not how he had imagined it. So, for example, Habib just automatically assumed that it was the father who beats one of the girls, and then she kind of went like, "No, it's my mom." So that should already give you some skepticism of what's actually going on in Saudi Arabia, the real situation. But anyways, V likes to bring up communist Romania a lot. Well, I'm just going to use a comparable example of China. I'm from China, which had a worse communism, at least in terms of scale and scope, and China is still ruled by the Communist Party to this day. And unlike Europe, Eastern Europe or Western Europe, as I've said, the gynocentrism wasn't nearly as bad as in China. The dominant Confucius ideology regarding men and women is literally men are better than women, sons are better than daughters. So this is something very similar to the Islamic ideology about how men are favored by Allah and all that bullshit. So even when I grew up, I hear these things that parents say to each other, and they say this because I happen to be among the first generation of the only child policy, which was enforced in all the major cities. The rural areas had more leniency in the matter, but the cities all had to do it. So those people who had a daughter would come and sign and comfort each other about the fact that they didn't have a son, right? So they would sometimes say things like, yeah, well, maybe having a daughter isn't so bad. And my parents would tell me how because I'm a girl and I'm the only child, our family is basically going extinct because they believe that family heritage get passed down exclusively down the male line, right? I mean, it's retarded, but it's the belief that I was told growing up. Now, you're probably at this point going to say, well, oh my god, this is just so horrible. Well, this just proves it, right? In China, there's patriarchy. Women are treated worse than men. Sure, it sucks, and it seems that you would want to be a man rather than a woman if you lived in China. But actually, there's a little catch. You see, ideologies are dangerous because of this one little embarrassing thing called reality, which ideologies have hard time adjusting to. That's why they're ideologies rather than scientific theories. The ideology in China that men are better than women is based on the notion of certain characteristics attributed to masculinity, for lack of a better word. Like men are geniuses, men are builders of society, men are head of the household, men are the ones who will just somehow fix all the family and the world's problems. Essentially, men are somehow not human. They're like Hercules, semi-gods or some shit. This means that if you happen to have those gifts, you just happen to be very smart, very accomplished, responsibility comes easy to you, etc., yes, you will reap the benefits of such a society of men are better than women. Sons are better than daughters. So let's say you are a guy in China and you have a sister. Both you and your sister grew up to be exemplary men and exemplary women. Your parents, your family, would say something to the effect of, "We are so proud of our son." Well, our daughter is great too, and no doubt she will find herself a nice husband. But our son, he is the real pride of the family. He is our golden treasure. He is the one who will represent our family for generations to come. Bullshit like that. So in such a scenario, you will be treated at least a little bit better than your sister. But here comes the rub. What if you're not? What if you sort of just failed in life, or not even fail, but you just do well enough to survive, but you're nothing even remotely remarkable? Well then, you are not a man. That's it. Your sister, well, she's still a woman unless she somehow can breed or is clinically insane or some shit, but you don't fit what the man is supposed to be. Therefore, you're not a man. So I suspect that in places like Saudi Arabia, it's probably something very similar. V sort of switched his goalposts a little when Karen brought up the point that you don't hear about men's trouble in Saudi Arabia, and V said, well, I mean, if I were a middle-class man in Saudi Arabia. So this is the thing, now you have a condition and you draw a little red circle around this population of Saudi Arabia. And by the way, the term middle class is rather loose. When people think of middle class, they think of something like my family. I mean, we're not considered to be rich, but we live in a nice house, in a nice neighborhood, we have 2 cars, and we can go on vacations every once in a while. But actually, we're in the top 20th percentile. I happen to know this because of taxes we have to pay to the government. So that's not really middle class, it's more upper middle class. So if this is the upper middle class you mean, that's already just 20% of Saudi Arabia, you then draw another circle around. But even in the 20%, are you willing to play the lottery? Because you can be born in the 20th percentile and still end up to be a failure of a man as outlined in such a society. So really, at the end of the day, you can go very high or just, hit the bottom. So then you might come up with other conditions in which you would rather be a man in Saudi Arabia. And each time you draw that red circle of the population of Saudi Arabia that you'd rather be in as a man, it will get smaller and smaller until you take a big step back and you realize that it's really just small minority of men in Saudi Arabia that truly reap such benefits. Because the reality is, men are human beings. They have just as much fear, worries, troubles, and flaws as any other human being, even when compared to a child. So probably the only safe bet in Saudi Arabia is if you were born into the aristocratic or royal family. In that situation, yes, I would definitely rather be a man in Saudi Arabia than a woman, because you are already given the privilege. You are already supposed to be the exemplary. And in many cases, you're exempt from the responsibility of the common man and are given many things that the common man don't have, like money and servants and shit. That's where the ideology of, quote, men are just better than women will kick in. And it's likely that those men and the men who happen to fit the expectations, for example, it's been brought up in the stream about, women can be slaves and men can have multiple wives. Those are the rich men, Those are the men are kind of the men we see and then conclude how much better men fare compared to women in Saudi Arabia.